You know what can change your entire life? A letter from the draft board telling you to report. And just like that, you go from sitting at the breakfast table, eating bacon and eggs, petting the dog, thinking about the day ahead, to being on a bus, headed towards boot camp for 8 weeks, and then sent to your new home in some god-awful place. My dad didn't have that worry. He enlisted, but he was sent to a god-awful place called Lawton, Oklahoma. A couple of months ago, he was telling me about being stationed in Oklahoma. In the morning, when he'd go to take a poop, the toilets were face to face in rows and they lined the walls. No doors, no stalls. And this one guy who came into camp with my dad on the same bus, little stocky black guy my dad met, well, this guy would come in and sit down on the toilet next to my dad and start talking. So I asked my dad, what did he talk to you about? My pop said, the same thing every time. Home. So this baseball player said this to a reporter from Sporting News back in December 1943. Perhaps the best break of my career was to develop a sore arm. I used to pitch entirely overhanded, and I like to cut loose. The injury forced me to pitch sidearm, and I developed my sinker. As a pitcher, when your arm is so damaged that you can't raise it above your head to throw a pitch, most guys would hang it up and get a steady job. Not Cotton. He reinvented his pitching motion, dialed it in, and in less than half a season as a St. Louis Cardinal became a fan favorite as a 29-year-old rookie. Who's Cotton? Well, I'll tell you. He's Alpha Eugene Brazle, nicknamed Cotton, but signs his autograph Al. Pitcher, lefty, MLB debut 1943, but he started playing semi-pro ball back in 1935 and hails from Loyal, Oklahoma. He stands 6'2", 185 pounds, tall and gangly, with wide square shoulders and chiseled features. He had a real long neck, which made him appear even taller, and you can see that on any one of his baseball cards. He had a head full of light blonde hair, almost white, so he was called Cotton. Another 1955 autograph from Al Brazle. Sacramento Solons, playing the Seals. Life in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s was not easy for many Americans. I have close family members that can attest to this. They just never talk about it. I'm sure you have family members from that generation who are the same way. They are called the silent generation. Back then, they didn't sit around moaning about how bad their situation was. There were times when a lot of folks couldn't afford many of life's daily essentials like new shoes. My mom and her big sister thought everybody put cardboard inside their shoes when they had holes in them. They would slip and slide their way back and forth to school on the hills of San Francisco. My mom said she never realized and didn't think they were poor and remembers many good times as a grade schooler. And had lots of birthday parties with lots of kids. Yet at the same time, her Uncle Tony was overseas fighting in World War II. When you're stateside and nobody's shooting at you, and you get to sleep in a bed, you best not complain. If and when those soldiers came back, only a few got to play ball to help keep their mind off the war. Many came back and were alone, or some had family but still had to get a job and try to start a normal life. So you go from not knowing if you and your buddies are going to live or die at any given moment, pretty much all day, every day, and night. At times living life at 100 miles an hour, with some days bullets going everywhere while performing your building-to-building sweeps in the big cities and small towns. Just as bad was clearing German farms, knowing that most, if not all of these German farmers fought in World War I and will fight in their overalls now if they have to. which makes it hard for you as a GI, shooting a farmer on his own farm as his family watches. You go from that to now, say you're back in Kansas or San Francisco. Everything seems so still, slow, and quiet. You go from an all day, everyday adrenaline rush to laying in a quiet bed alone with your thoughts, good and horrible, contemplating your next move in life. I hear many soldiers miss the camaraderie and being part of a team that has a mission, being part of something that is bigger than yourself. And when that is gone, so is your self-worth. You are no longer on a mission to save the world from dictators. There are no more goals for you and your team to achieve. Now you're part of Team Texaco, pumping gas. Yeah, it's not the same thing, not even close. Many soldiers who served overseas, like my great uncle Tony, came home from the war mentally damaged and wasn't the same person and never would be. Shell-shocked, battle fatigue, PTSD, whatever your generation calls it, war is hell. But unless you actually lived it, those are just words. You can watch old clips of war footage and say, oh, how awful, and then change the channel, or take a nap on your couch. If you were in the war, there was no changing the channel. It was life on the edge, 24 hours a day, every day, until you were captured, killed, or the war was over. I knew people from that generation. It's called the greatest generation, and it is. These folks are in their late 90s and older now. Do they complain? Yes, but they complain about how bad things are today. Not how hard it was for them back then. And therein lies the difference. That's why I have a hard time dealing with the past couple of generations who are soft like pudding, limp-wristed, overweight snowflakes, who say, I'm so special, look at me, and then say, stop looking at me because you're invading my personal space. Wackos who don't know the real definition of or never experienced real hard times. I'm not talking about when Walmart ran out of your purple hair dye and you had to make an extra trip to Target. My point is, most of these players I talk about had difficult childhoods, whether it was because of their ethnicity, religion, skin color, or lack of wealth. But what I'm finding is many of these players would lose their dad when they were just kids. Cotton was only 10 when his dad died. He had to quit high school when he was 15 and got a job to support the family. Al Brazle first started playing semi-pro ball in 1935 at the age of 21. That's a little old, but it wasn't long before Red Sox scouts took notice of the hard-throwing lefty, signing him in 1936 and sending him to the Little Rock Travelers of the Southern Association League. It was there Cotton would spend a few seasons working on his craft. It was in 1940 when he got his first big break and was invited to the Red Sox spring training camp in Sarasota, Florida. When he got there, he would have a couple cups of coffee with his new roommate, a 21-year-old rookie named Ted Williams. But they weren't roommates for long because Cotton threw his arm out trying to impress Red Sox manager Joe Cronin, and instead of making the team, he was demoted and then traded to the St. Louis Cardinals. It was there Cotton would have to reinvent himself as a sidearm pitcher because he could no longer lift his arm above his head. By 1943, Al Brazle had become a pitcher worthy of a call-up. Pitching great for the Sacramento Solons, leading the PCL in ERA, and he would get that call-up from the Cardinals in July. The 29-year-old rookie would impress the team by going 8-2 with a 1.59 ERA and helping them win the NL pennant. Then comes October. Al Brazle gets his chance to shine on the biggest stage there is, the World Series at Yankee Stadium. Manager Billy Southworth picks him to start Game 3 against the Yanks. He held them scoreless through 5 innings, giving up only 2 hits, but it all fell apart in the 6th and 7th innings by poor fielding, and the Yankees would blow the game open in the 8th, handing Al the loss. No time to wallow in sadness, because the very next morning, the guy they call Cotton was inducted into the service, sent to Fort Riley, Kansas, given a gun, trained on how to use it, and would spend the rest of World War II fighting the Nazis in Europe. And when Al Brazle came back from the war, he came back in one piece and joined the Cardinals for the start of the 1946 campaign. He was 32 years old and would be a Redbird for the next 9 seasons, the only MLB team he would play for. In 1946, the St. Louis Cardinals were once again in the World Series, and Cotton would again get the nod to be a starting pitcher, this time from manager Eddie Dyer. Different manager, same result. Al Brazle took the loss in his only start in that 1946 World Series against the Red Sox. Fortunately for Al and the rest of the city of St. Louis, they had the Cat, Harry Brackeen, who was pitching incredibly and would do what no other lefty in history had ever done before, getting 3 wins in a single World Series. Getting back to the lefty pitcher they called Cotton, Al Brazle won 14 games in 1947, 1949, and in 1951. Then at the age of 37, he would transform himself once again by becoming what they call today a relief pitcher and would compile most saves in a season, a stat they didn't keep back then. He twice set Cardinal team records for appearances by a pitcher, averaging 55 per season, and would lead the NL in saves in 1952 and 1953. His last year in the majors was 1954. Cotton is pushing 40 years old and is the oldest player to appear in an NL game that year. St. Louis would release him at the end of the season, and he would sign on with the Chicago White Sox, attending their 1955 spring training camp, but was cut. So Al Brazle headed back out west for the 1955 season to finish his career back again with the Sacramento Solons in the Pacific Coast League. That's when my dad saw him pitch a few times and was able to get a few of his autographs. Now let's go back 20 years to 1935. A 21-year-old Al Brazle is walking home after a game in which the promoter did not pay the players. A car pulls up alongside Al and asks if he can talk for a minute. This guy says he can put Al in touch with his friend, who is the manager of a ball club in the Southern Association League. So he goes down to Little Rock and is told they don't need any pitchers. So he's sent to pitch for a team in Hot Springs. It was there Cotton struck out 23 batters in one game. He said, "I guess that made an impression." It sure did, because shortly thereafter, the guy they call Cotton was signed on his way to a very nice career that spanned 3 decades and would see him pitching in 2 different World Series, with his team winning one of them. He was nothing special in his 9+ years in the minors, going 75 and 83. But in his 10 years in the big leagues, Al Brazle would be top 10 in the National League in many categories throughout his MLB career, winning 97 games and losing only 64 with a 3.31 ERA. His adjusted ERA, which compares a pitcher's ERA to the league's ERA, and then adjusts it for ballparks, well, it turns out this ranks the guy they call Cotton equal to Raleigh Fingers and just above pitching greats Bob Lemon and Warren Spahn.